This is NDTV, and you're watching NDTV 24/7.
Good evening and welcome to Politically Incorrect. Tonight we come to you from the beautiful St. Stephen's College in Delhi. As always, we're joined by two of the country's top political commentators, Manishankar Iyer and Shopun Dasgupta, who also happen to be old boys of this college, and we hope they'll share some of their memories with us as they debate the week's big issues. What sense really do we make of the events that have played out before us this week? The US credit rate downgrading, which saw a sort of chain result, markets across the world, an absolute bloodbath, including in our own Sensex and Nifty. Across the Atlantic, unprecedented scenes of riots and looting on the streets of London, which soon spread to other cities in the United Kingdom as well. Many believe these were rooted in poverty and social discontent of the people there. Now, is there a commonality to these events? In this chain of events, do we read some kind of failure of economic policy? That brings us to our question tonight. Is it time to rethink globalization? Let's begin our opening round. Mani, we'll come to you first. We'll take 90 seconds of introductory comments from both of you, after which we throw this open to interjections. And of course, we'll have our bright audience coming in later sections of this show. But do you think this is now the time, given global events that we've seen play out this week and indeed in months before this, is it time to revisit the whole notion of globalization?
Yes, certainly it is. But it is also time to revisit St. Stephen's. I left this college exactly 50 years ago. I'm told that the food here is as awful as it used to be in my time. I'm told that the loos here stink in exactly the same way as they did in my time. But I lived in A block, which is now the ladies' hostel. So at long last, there's a girl in my bed. That's the only major change that has taken place in 50 years. In regard to the question that you've posed to us, just about the time that these youngsters were born is when the Soviet Union collapsed. And in the triumphalism of that moment, when it was decreed that clearly democracy was the best political form, there was the Washington Consensus, which added that you couldn't have true democracy unless you had free markets. And it was the marriage of free elections and free markets that constituted the Washington Consensus. And for the better part of 20 years, the world in consequence experienced unprecedented high rates of economic growth. But it also experienced much higher rates of concentration of income and wealth than had ever been the case before. And this was reflected in India. I don't think our economic reforms were the consequence of the Washington Consensus, but it followed much the same path. And we've had exactly the same experience. Very high rates of growth of GDP, but at the same time, such extraordinary inequality being spread in our society that probably the levels of inequality of income and wealth in 21st century India are worse than they were in the Nizam's Hyderabad. And all this is having dramatic political fallouts, both in the Western world, which drove this globalization, as well as in India, which is now beginning to experience the downside of the processes of liberalization. So we'll talk about this at some length later, but over to Shopun.
Well, you know what's nice about St. Stephen's College, as Mani just pointed out, is that nothing really seems to change. And what's very reassuring about an old communist like Manishankar Iyer is that he too doesn't change. The inevitability, the final crisis of capitalism is a term I first encountered when I was a school student in Calcutta, but I'm told it dates back to 1918, if not earlier.
Well, it dates back to Marx and
No,
1848.
it doesn't. Actually, it dates back to Lenin. May I correct you on that? Marx was actually a great advocate of the progressive facets of capitalism. But never mind, we'll let your historical inaccuracies pass for the moment. I think what's a bit funny or what's a bit alarming, is how the actions of a few mobsters in London and Birmingham and some other places can be equated with a general upsurge against globalization. It's a baffling proposition which defies all logic to me. I mean, if you're going to loot mobile phone shops, if you're going to loot betting shops, if 9-year-old kids who've never worked in their lives, who are still not in the labor market, are going to walk off with one bottle of alcohol, how does that constitute a great upsurge, an economic revolt against globalization?
Well,
but yet, such is the sort of type of consensual wisdom which we seem to receive from people. Yes, Standard & Poor has downgraded the United States.
NDTV's cricket app, Android and iPhone, fastest scorecard, special analysis, and much more. Download free. ndtv.com/apps.